Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. Very excited to have a great group of classrooms joining us from across North America, from Canada and the United States, and even more excited for our guests today. We have Sven Lindblad joining us. He was born in Switzerland and traveled extensively with his father, who was a renowned adventure travel pioneer, Lars Erik. For 6 years, Sven lived in East Africa, photographing elephants and wildlife in Kenya. And this early exposure to nature and wildlife taught him the importance of maintaining our natural resources and understanding the cultures in remote regions. He founded Special Expeditions, which is now Lindblad Expeditions, in 1979. And he's had many awards and honors over the years, including being an honorary member of the General Assembly of the Charles Darwin Foundation in the Galapagos Islands. He had endemic species of moth named after him in the Galapagos, which is pretty amazing, in honor of his conservation work. He also serves on the boards for the Safina Center, the National Geographic Society's International Council of Advisors, and he's a founding member of the Ocean Elders and an advisor for the Pristine Seas Foundation. So Sven, it is so great, as always, to have you joining us for our hangout today.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Well, I'm excited to have you joining us today. We've got a great group of classrooms who will meet a little bit later when it's time for the questions. But first, I have a message to deliver. So a lot of teachers who found out this hangout were happening, they sent me a bunch of messages, and they wanted to extend a huge thank you for everything you do with the Grosvenor Teacher Fellowship. So I got a ton of messages last night for teachers who wanted me to say thank you and to share how amazing it is and what it means to them. And for anyone joining in who hasn't heard of this program, it's an amazing program with Lindblad Expeditions and National Geographic, where teachers from across North America are able to go on a expedition with Lindblad and then bring back all that new learning, all that new knowledge to their communities, to their schools, to their colleagues, and into their classrooms. It's an incredible professional development program, and I was thrilled to be a fellow in 2016 and to go to the Galapagos. It was pretty amazing. And the new class of 2018 was just announced recently. So a big thank you, Sven, from all the teachers. There's actually a few joining us today as well in the hangout. So,
that's great. So I think we're going to take about 40 teachers this year. So it's growing every year, and it's just such a privilege to be able to take teachers out there because they're such important members of our community.
Absolutely. So I believe it started 12 years ago and started with 2 teachers. So it's grown incredibly. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Sven, we've hosted you in the past. You've talked to us about pristine seas. You've talked to us about the Galapagos. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Antarctica.
Yeah. So, it's funny. I don't normally spend too much time thinking about statistics, but Antarctica is one of these places that just it's a place of superlatives, and I just wanted to give you guys a few examples because I don't know what you know about Antarctica, and I'm sure most people don't know a lot of detail about Antarctica, but can you imagine here's a place that houses about 70% of the world's fresh water, about 90% of the world's freshwater ice. It's about 1.5 times the size of the United States, basically entirely covered with ice, except for some dry valleys in the middle of the continent. And it's referred to as the largest desert in the world. In these dry valleys, there's virtually no rain or snow or anything. It's just totally bone dry. So it's the coldest, it's the windiest, it's the driest place on Earth. Interestingly enough, the first child that was ever born in the Antarctic was born in 1979. A pregnant mother was brought down to the Antarctic with the idea that if a child was born there, they could lay claim to a territory by virtue of the fact that a child was born. So that child is now 89, 99, 2000, almost 40 years old. So the Antarctic is an unusual continent. It's the seventh continent on a multitude of levels, but I think one of the most interesting parts is that it is not owned by anybody. It is not a nation. There are many different countries that have territorial claims, if you will, but all governed by an international treaty, which dedicates the continent to science and knowledge. You're not allowed to do anything militarily there. You're not allowed to exploit things like oil and gas and minerals. And it's the only place on Earth that has that designation. And it's been that way since about, I think, if I recall, 1958. So it's about 60 years old, this idea, when the world came together and decided to create this continent or designate this continent for peace and for science. And boy, do we need peace, and boy, do we need science. So that's just a quick overview. Of course, in the winter, it's pretty dead. It's totally dark. All the living creatures in the Antarctic basically all of the living creatures live along the coast. So huge numbers of penguins come there in the Antarctic summer, which is our winter. Seals come down, all different kinds of whales come down, because the seas around Antarctica are very, very rich in plankton, which is sort of the beginning of the marine food chain. And so all of these creatures, seabirds as well, are connected to that very, very rich marine environment. And so it's an explosion of life for a few months every year, and then everything disappears and it goes dark for the rest of the year. So that's a quick overview, Joe.
No, that's great. So Sven, can you tell us a little bit about your first trip to Antarctica? How it felt, what it looked like, your first time in Antarctica?
Yeah. So when I first went to Antarctica in 1973. My father had built a ship that was purpose-built for exploring the Antarctic. It had an ice-hardened hull, so it could plow through ice. And I left New Zealand in late December, or we left New Zealand in late December. And when we first approached the Antarctic continent, it was just thick with sea ice as far as the eye could see. And it took us 3 days crashing through the ice to get to the Antarctic continent. And for me personally, I had never seen anything like this. I was living in East Africa. I was mesmerized by just the wildness of the place, how big this place is. And just crashing through the ice. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I just could not go to sleep. And of course, it was daylight all of the time. And there were all kinds of things we saw along the way. Seals on the ice floes, penguins, the odd whale. And then eventually, after the third day, we reached the Antarctic continent and went ashore at night at about 11 o'clock. And in this huge, huge, huge colony of penguins called, in this particular case, Adelie penguins, hundreds of thousands of them. It was a magical experience.
All right. And I know you visited many times since then. And I know you have some pictures queued up that you'd like to share with us today. Yeah,
it might be nice to show some of these, and then I could talk through some of them.
Perfect.
Now I need help with this.
Looks good so far. There we go.
Okay, so there are, I think it's 6 different kinds of penguins in the Antarctic. I can't remember exactly, but this is a particular kind called king penguins. And you actually don't see them on the Antarctic continent. You see them in the sub-Antarctic islands, the Falkland Islands, and an island called South Georgia, which I'll explain a little bit more about later, because I have a picture of the huge gathering of these. But they are, in my estimation, one of the most beautiful of the penguins. So there's lots and lots of icebergs that break off of these huge ice shelves. At one point, I remember, and I thought this was just such an incredible fact, that the largest iceberg at that time, this was in the 70s, maybe there's been a larger one since, was larger than Belgium, a floating piece of ice larger than Belgium. So you can get an idea of its size. But you see regularly icebergs that are like huge skyscrapers. And when you think about whatever you see above the water, there's 6 or 7 times that amount under the water. So these are huge, huge, huge chunks of ice. Whoa, I heard that. Yes. So icebergs happen to be great places for penguins to rest on. How those penguins got on top of that iceberg is a bit of a mystery, because it doesn't look like it's that easy to climb, and they cannot fly, but they somehow got on top of that. Wow. This is another example of king penguins coming out onto the beach. So basically they fly underwater. They are very, very good swimmers and divers, and they dive quite deep to get their food. They're always nervous when they go into the water, because that's the only place that there is any danger for them. There's nothing on land that can hurt them. But once they're in the water, they're potentially vulnerable to occasionally killer whales, but not often, but mostly an animal called a leopard seal. I think I have a picture later on, and I'll show you. So you can always see it when they're about to go in the water. They're always looking a little nervous, and it's like they're looking over their shoulders to see if the next guy will go first. They jump very well. This is, again, one of the sub-Antarctic islands, the Falkland Islands, and these are Albatross, and they have huge, huge wingspans. And these guys spend, except when they're nesting and courting, here they're courting. The guy on the left is trying to impress the female on the right. But the rest of the time they're at sea and hardly ever land at all. They're just flying the whole time. This just gives you an idea of size. These people, it's a bit of scale to show how little and insignificant we are when we're surrounded with such a landscape. Very, very mountainous all around the coast of Antarctica. Another creature that's really fun, very smelly, by the way. If you get too close to them, they sometimes spit, and then you don't want to get that on you, are elephant seals. They're huge, and they just lie about in and amongst the king penguins. Now, these brown guys you see here, those are chicks, and you can see in a couple of instances they're about to lose their brown, fluffy feathers, and then will begin to look more like the adults. So these are quite late in the season, these chicks. You can see one, for example, just under one of the elephant seals, that all he has left is a little bit of fuzz on top of his head.
See the brown one and then the one.
This is a fur seal. So there's lots and lots of them. Now, these guys were hunted nearly to extinction for their pelts and their oil. They've made a comeback. and there's lots and lots and lots of them on South Georgia. You have to be very careful of them though when they're breeding, because they get very testy. They can get a bit aggressive, and they can come at you real fast. And every now and then somebody gets bitten by one of these guys, and so you have to be really, really, really careful.
Wow, that's pretty.
When we take people to the Antarctic, we do a lot with something called the Zodiac. It's a rubber boat, very, very solid. You can land almost anywhere, and it's a great way to go around and look at icebergs. This gives you a little bit of a sense of what this just relatively small piece of ice looks like underwater. So you can kind of see it goes deeper and deeper, and it's about, as I said, 6 or 7 times what you see above the water. You can count 6 or 7 times that underneath the water. That's just a beautiful picture of an iceberg, which I wish I had taken.
No, he said he didn't take this photo, but he wishes he did.
This iceberg and this scene has a lot of personal meaning to me, because there is a beautiful cove in Antarctica, a large cove that a few years ago I went to for the first time, and it was named after my father, which was really quite an honor, and it was very emotional to go in there and on this particularly beautiful evening with all these beautiful icebergs around.
Get some ideas for your
There's lots of whales down in the Antarctic, and you see lots more these days than you did 20, 30 years ago, particularly humpback whales, which is what this is. And generally speaking, there's very often they come right up to you because they're curious, not at all afraid, and it's a great encounter. So this is one of the pictures. Just imagine this. This is tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of king penguins in South Georgia. I mean, to me, I think about it kind of like the great herds of Africa on the Serengeti Plains. Just as far as the eye can see are these nesting penguins. Now that's the leopard seal. So this is the guy that
he's dangerous.
In many ways is the most feared of all the animals. I guess this and killer whales are the most feared animals in all of the Antarctic. This guy hunts penguins almost exclusively, and he waits. And when in the areas that penguins know there are leopard seals, they are even more scared, because this is the one thing that they worry about every day when they go into the water. This is a king penguin coming ashore, getting caught in a wave, doing a bit of surfing.
Oh, wow. Mom and Dad.
This is earlier in the season when the chicks are much smaller. They are voraciously hungry. It's exhausting being a penguin parent. You constantly have to go out and fish, and as soon as you come back, your chick is like coming at you, pecking at you, your feet, saying, "Feed me, feed me, feed me."
Oh, dear. Right on the cusp. Oh.
I don't know if I can't remember the name of that film about penguins, but there was quite a lot of this going on in that animated film, where this is called tobogganing. So when they've gone up to high ground and they want to come down, they very often just get on their bellies and go down like a sled. And it's actually quite comical to watch. And that's it. That's just putting a few pictures together to give you a sense of this place.
All right, Sven, if you hit the green button one more time, the the green share screen button on the Hangout. That'll bring you back to us.
I think I'm back. Am I back?
Not yet. Just if you can reach the green, the green button there, it'll bring you back. There we go. Perfect. You're back. Well, Sven, that was incredible. Antarctica just looks like such a beautiful, amazing place. How many times do you think you've been now since your first visit?
Probably around 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably around. I just came back, interestingly enough, to its sort of counterpart, the Arctic. And the Arctic has similarities, but also is very, very different. And I went there, I mean, just now in March. I'd never been there in March before. I haven't been there actually before June. And I wanted to see what it would be like in the spring. So this is the Arctic spring. And it was an unbelievably beautiful experience. Saw lots of polar bears, beautiful ice. It was a magnificent experience.
All right, sounds amazing. Well, Sven, if you're up for it, are you ready to meet some classrooms?
Sure.
All right. So as mentioned, we do have groups of classrooms who are watching live on YouTube as well. So feel free to let us know where you're watching from in the chat sidebar and send in a question or two, and we'll try to get to some of those. But for now, let's meet one of our live classrooms. So let's see. There we go. Let's start off with Mrs. Steinhoff's class. They're in Guelph, Ontario. They're a grade 4 class. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, grade 4s?
Yeah.
All right, nice and loud.
What are the accommodations in Antarctica?
Like, where do you sleep?
Like, where do you sleep?
Oh, well, it depends. I mean, if you're, for example, if you're one of the scientists, they have their bases, and they usually have very, very simple, well, maybe less so now, accommodation. Some of these guys stay over all winter long. And then with us, we have 2 ships in the Antarctic every summer, Antarctic summer. And one takes 100 people, one takes 148 people, and people sleep in cabins on board the ship. And it's kind of like a base camp, very comfortable, and we take care of them.
Ask how many different species.
All right, great question. We're going to jump now. Let's go to Austin, Texas. Mr. Hance's class, they're grade 5s joining us. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, grade 5s?
And we actually flipped it. We have a first grade class. Mr. Gordon's class is with us. And Mr. Lindblad, I'm a 2018 Grosvenor Tucci Fellow, and I want to say thank you from all of us. We're all thrilled and honored for this opportunity. So thank you. We have one of our students here. She'll ask a question. Go ahead and stand up and she's going to ask. Go ahead. So here's your question.
My question is, how do the penguins camouflage?
So her question is about the camouflage for the penguins. How do they camouflage themselves whenever they're being hunted?
Okay, so they're basically, so if you put a penguin in the water, like, and so its back is up against the sky, that's dark and the bottom is white. So they blend in quite well that way. So the bottom, the white, sort of blends in with the sort of snow in the sky. And if you look at them from the top, they kind of blend in with the water. And so I think that's their mechanism for trying to go as unseen as possible.
All right, great question. And a sneaky sub in from grade 5s to grade 1s. All right, let's see. We're going to visit Mrs. Holmes' group in Kansas City. They're grade 7 students. Let me turn their microphone on. Hey, Kansas City, how are you?
Hi, thank you. So we have a question from one of our 7th graders.
Oh, how many layers of clothing do you have to wear?
That's really an interesting question. And the answer is, of course, it depends. But, you know, every time I've been in the Antarctic, I felt warmer than I feel in New York in the winter, just to put that in perspective. Where do you guys live, by the way?
Kansas City. Kansas.
Does it get really cold there in the winter? I guess it does, right?
Not super cold, but
Not super cold. Okay. But the reason is it's so dry. So it can really be very cold, but it's dry, and so you don't feel it. So, you know, I always advise people to dress like an onion. So you have layers. So you have like a turtleneck, and then you might have some thermal thing, and then a fleece, and then a parka, and you should be good to go. And then you can take off whatever you want to take off as it heats up. And once the sun's out, you can feel really quite warm.
All right. Great question. Thanks. Grade 7s. Let's visit another. Actually, let's grab a question from online this time. So we've got a group of grade 5s who are joining us from Wisconsin, and they're wondering, Sven, if you know how many expeditions you've been on in total, not just Antarctica, but around the world.
Oh, goodness. I have no idea. Several hundred, that's for sure.
Amazing. It's amazing. And it never gets old, does it?
Nope. Nature never gets old.
Awesome. Well, Wisconsin, thank you for that question, grade 5s. That was great. Let's meet another classroom. This time we're going to go to Sarnia, Ontario in Canada. We've got a grade 4 class with Mrs. Salisbury. Let me turn your microphone on. How are we doing, grade 4s?
What's the most rarest species you found?
What's the most, sorry?
Rarest species you found?
Oh, in the Antarctic.
Yes.
It's a seal called a Ross seal, which I've only seen one twice in my life.
And are they endangered?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, great question. Let's see. Let's go to Calgary this time. We're going to go to Calgary. Got a grade 5 classroom joining us. And looks like your microphone's on. How's it going, Calgary?
Hi, we're pretty excited to hear the temperatures in Antarctica, because in Calgary it can get to -20 in the winters, which we had this week. So
How
did you guys get so close to the penguins to get the photographs? Like without them, like with the babies, wouldn't the parents be protective and like chase you away?
So I'm going to answer that in a second, but I just have to tell you about the temperatures, because like -20 is pretty cold. The coldest temperatures in the Antarctic on some of the mountain ridges can get to -130 plus Fahrenheit.
wow.
That's not cold at all. So your question about parents being protected. See, animals are really very, very smart. They pretty much make a couple of determinations fairly early on in life. One is
It's like
can they eat you, or will you hurt them? And if they're not interested in eating you, penguins of course are not, and they pretty much decided that you or your species do not hurt them, they're not going to use the energy to run away, because you're just there. It's like you saw the elephant seals and the penguins living amongst each other. I mean, an elephant seal could crush those penguins, but they pretty much have accepted they're just part of the landscape, and they're not fearful of them. So you can literally walk right up to a penguin. You don't do that, generally speaking. You know, you stay a few feet away, 3, 5, 6 feet away, but often they'll come up to you.
All right, great question. Who have we visited? Perfect. Let's go to Bristol. I believe that's in Connecticut, with some grade 3s with Mrs. Adrosny. Let me turn their microphone on. There they are. How's it going, grade 3s?
Great.
And so this class here, we had a cancellation this morning. They jumped in last minute, so it's awesome to have you joining us today.
I'm quick. Go ahead.
Have you ever seen an Arctic fox in the Arctic?
Can you hear?
Have I ever seen an Arctic fox? Yes, last week. I saw several of them, and I even saw one that was in a black phase. which is evidently quite rare. I'd never seen one before in my life. It was back. So yeah, last week.
All right, there you go. Not that long ago at all. Who have we visited yet? We've been to most classrooms. We have not been to visit our group in Whitney, Ontario. So they're having a snow day today. So there's actually only 4 students in the whole school, and they're joining us today. So let me turn their microphone on. There we go. Thanks for coming to school today.
Thank you for having us. We're very excited. We have grade 2 to 5 represented here.
One from each?
Yep.
Got 4 kids, 2, 3, 4, 5. So one from
Madeline, go ahead.
How many species of penguins are there?
yeah, that's a good question. I think it's 11, but I'm not 100% sure. I keep getting the number. But I think it's 11. Here, I'll Google it. Want to Google it?
Yeah.
Google's such a great tool. Everything's always available. I've got 17 came up when I Googled it.
Was it 17?
Yeah. There's those sneaky penguins who live in other places too, like the Galapagos and such, who you wouldn't think about sometimes.
In Australia.
Yeah, fairy penguins in Australia. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. That seal, one of the classrooms is asking about the seal, the really rare one. Was that the Ross seal?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, Whitney, thank you for the question. That's perfect. From Whitney, Ontario. Looks like we visited all our live classrooms, so we're going to visit them again, see if there's a couple more questions, but I'm going to grab another question off YouTube because we have more groups who are watching on YouTube. So let's see.
Well, no, he'll notify.
Oh, we have another teacher, Julie. She's online right now, and she's sending out a big thank you. She's a 2018 Grosvenor Teacher Fellow this year.
That's great.
We have a group joining us from Paris, Ontario. They join us quite regularly with Mrs. Beckett's class, and they're wondering, does anything grow in Antarctica?
So that's really an interesting lichens, basically. That's really it. Lichens and some mosses, but nothing. There are no trees. There is nothing that grows above a millimeter or so above the surface.
All right, perfect. And boys and girls, if you don't know much about mosses and lichens or what they look like, that can be your homework assignment from this hangout, is to look them up and see what they look like. All right, well, we visited all our classrooms who are live, so let's open it up and see if there's a couple more questions because we have a little bit of more time. So send someone up to the camera and give me a wave, and that'll be my signal that your classroom has another question. And so there's Mrs. Steinhoff's group in Guelph. Let me turn their microphone on.
Have you ever Have you ever dug up a bones from a dinosaur called Cryolophosaurus or something?
I have not, but I wish I had.
Is that a species that's found in Antarctica?
Not that I'm aware of. Have you ever dug up one?
No.
No. Well, if you do, let me know. Where would you find it, out of curiosity?
In Antarctica.
It is in Antarctica. Okay. Well, how do you? Well, say that again. What was the kind?
Cryolophosaurus.
Cryolophosaurus. I'm going to look that up.
It looks like a T-Rex a little bit, but it has like a little crest on its head, like two little things like that.
All right. Well, there you go, Sven. Something you haven't done in Antarctica yet is find a dinosaur fossil. So that could be a new mission, a new goal.
I found fossils. I wish I had one here. I found plenty of fossils, mostly of shells. But wow, I'd love to find a dinosaur. Who wouldn't?
Absolutely. All right, I can see Mrs. Holmes' class, grade 7's waving again. So let me turn their microphone on. Okay, should be on.
All right. Hello. How does climate change affect the status in Antarctica?
Oh, that's also a great question. Well, first of all, the ice shelves of Antarctica are getting less and less stable. And so there is more breaking up of ice shelves, which spews off this fresh ice into the ocean.
Have you seen examples of the of Antarctica being unstable? Have you seen examples of this in your travels?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've done is there's a guy who wrote a book and made a film called Chasing Ice. And what he was doing was setting up cameras in different parts of the world, time-lapse cameras, so that you could see how ice was changing, glaciers and things were changing over time. And we worked with him to set up 9 of these in the Antarctic. And there is no question, there is evidence through that photography that these glaciers are receding. Receding means they're no longer advancing into the sea. They're breaking off and breaking off more rapidly. And so the faces are receding. So what will happen? The more of this ice that gets dumped into the sea, the more the sea levels will rise. So it's something to keep an eye out for, and it's not a good thing.
Yes.
All right, and that the movie you mentioned, Chasing Ice, any classrooms who are studying climate change or Antarctica right now or the Arctic, it's a really, really good movie. It's really, really well done. And that's awesome that you help them get some of those cameras out and get to some of those locations.
Okay.
All right, let me see a wave. There we go. Mr. Hance's group in Texas, your microphone's on.
Mr. Hans is going to Norway. Is there anything that he can tell us about Norway?
Oh yeah, well, Norway is a really beautiful country. I was there last week. So the where I went in the Arctic was part of the Norwegian Arctic, a place called Svalbard, Svalbard. And in the northern part of Svalbard, you're only 600 miles from the North Pole. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful part of the Arctic. But Norway is a land of mountains and fjords, very thin country, most of it. So most of it is bordering the sea, lots of fjords, lots of mountains, incredibly beautiful country, and really, really nice people.
All right, it sounds like your teacher's in for a treat. That's pretty exciting. Let's get one more question. We have time to sneak one more in. So let's go to Calgary this time. I can see Crazy waving in Calgary. So your microphone's on.
Explore what's like what was the reason that made you want to go to Antarctica to explore it?
Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, many people, me being one of them, want to explore more or less anywhere in the world that you've sort of established some interest around. I'd read some books about explorers, about a Norwegian by the name of Amundsen, who was the first man to get to the South Pole, and Shackleton, and various others. And I was just totally intrigued about the idea of getting there. I mean, when I went down there, it was sort of nobody else was going down there except for scientists and researchers. And it was just one of those places I wanted to see and see what it was all about.
All right. Well, Sven, thank you so much for taking some time to hang out with us today. I know the classrooms really enjoyed it. They all had really great questions. So classrooms, give yourselves a big pat on the back. That was awesome. And yeah, it sounds to me like you've got several hundred expeditions under the belt, and I'm sure you've got another one around the corner. So what's next for you?
What next for me? Well, I'm going to try and stay home a little bit.
All right.
I've got to organize my photographs.
Fair enough. Well, they are amazing photographs, and I always look forward to when we can do these hangouts. So I look forward to the next time we can do another one with classrooms.
All right. Thanks a lot, Joe. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Grosvenor's teachers. Have a great time out there. I'm really sorry I missed your gathering in Washington.
All right. Let me turn the microphones on and let the classrooms say goodbye and thank you. So classrooms, microphones are coming on. Let's get loud.
Thank
All right. Well, again, Sven, thank you so much. Arthur, thanks for setting everything up. And classrooms, thank you for joining us today. Hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you during our next hangout. Thanks, everyone.
All right, Joe. Bye.